Welcome to Shadow of Truth with your host Dave Kransberg from InvestmentResearchDynamics.com and Rory Hall from thedailycoin.org, and we are very honored and have the great pleasure of welcoming first-time guest Mr. Peter Schiff from EuroPacific.com. And Peter, how are you doing today?
Good.
I want to jump right in if we could. You had stated on a recent InfoWars interview that home ownership is down to 1967 levels. Is it even possible to get out of the current situation within this current paradigm, Peter? The U.S. dollar, which is an instrument of debt, the current levels of national debt that we have, funded and unfunded. How are we going to be able to get out of this current situation? And if not, what would you see as the solution to that?
Well, we can get out of it, but it's not going to be without a major crisis that's going to be much greater than the financial crisis of 2008. The reason that home ownership rates are at the lowest level since 1967 is that houses are much too expensive for the average American to afford. The Fed's monetary policy has propped up home prices while suppressing wages. So real estate is now more unaffordable than it's ever been. The only way people can hope to get a house is with a government guaranteed mortgage with a minimal down payment and an artificially low interest rate. But I think the home ownership rate is going to keep falling as more and more people lose quality jobs and are settling for low paying part-time jobs, and rents keep rising. If your rent keeps rising, you have no way to even save up for a down payment if you're spending everything you earn renting your apartment. And the rest of it goes to utilities or food or insurance. So American standard of living is going down. In 1950, the average new home cost about twice what the average American earns in a year. Today, the average new home costs about 10 times what the average American earns. That's why it's unaffordable.
It's unaffordable for most anybody. I mean, even people that are making good money. I mean, if it's 10 times what you're making, I mean, my goodness.
Well, that's the average income. Obviously, most people buying homes earn more than what the average guy makes. Although a lot of people today, when you buy a home, you need your wife to help you, right? You need two incomes to afford the mortgage, whereas in the 1950s, you only needed one.
And I wanted to take a quick look, and I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave for a minute. And the U.S. dollar is an instrument of debt. It's backed by the full faith and confidence of the U.S. government and nothing else. And I repeat, the U.S. dollar is backed by nothing but a belief that it has worth or value, when in fact there is no value, only debt. Does the Fed's balance sheet matter at all, since the currency, the U.S. dollar, is really nothing more than magic beans? And what real effect would the Federal Reserve's balance sheet disappearing, what would it have on what effect would it have on the economy?
The dollar's not magic beans. I mean, magic beans would be a big improvement, right? Those things, those magic beans grow into the clouds, and you can go up there and you can get all kinds of stuff from the giant, right? I mean, you have golden harp up there. I mean, the dollar's nothing. And yes, the balance sheet matters a lot. And in fact, the main reason the dollar hasn't collapsed is because people think the balance sheet's going to shrink. They don't realize the balance sheet is going to grow to the sky like those magic beans. And people realize that the Fed is not finished printing money, that it's only just starting to print, that we got QE4 coming, QE5 coming. We're going to have a crash in the dollar, and I think people have to do what they can to protect themselves. You're talking about debt. I have a special report which I would encourage your listeners to read. They can download it at the website Taxed by Debt, TAXED by Debt. Taxedbydebt.com is my special report on how this debt is going to lead to a massive inflation tax and what Americans can do to protect themselves from that tax.
That sounds great.
Yep, taxedbydebt.com. The report's great. Tax is not. Tax is awful.
Peter, obviously, we've seen an extreme degree of volatility in the markets over the past, really the past week. I mean, obviously, the mainstream Muppets are blaming it on China and the devaluation. What do you think the message is that's being sent here? I mean, especially yesterday. I mean, that was just absurd. And to me, it's evidence that the price discovery mechanism has completely broken down because of all of the Federal Reserve intervention in the markets. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, they want to blame this on China because that's a more palatable explanation than the truth, right? And if we can blame it on China, hey, don't worry about it. There's no real problem. It's just all this noise. The market will shrug it off. Look, this market was all about the Fed, right? The stock market wasn't going up because the economy was getting better, because corporate earnings were growing. In fact, the stock market was going up despite the fact that the economy was weak and that earnings were falling. It's all about cheap money, the share backs that are enabled by the 0% financing. It's been one big house of cards. The Fed created it, and now the Fed is threatening to destroy it. The Fed already removed one of the props, which was quantitative easing. They've ceased that. They've paused that program, but they've told people it's over. The only remaining prop is 0% interest rates, and the Fed has been hinting or threatening to remove that prop. And the markets have been in denial up until the last couple of weeks, and all of a sudden people started to contemplate a market without 0% interest rates, and they didn't like it. And the market started to go down, and I think this would be the beginning of a bear market if the Federal Reserve doesn't rescue the market again by promising not to raise rates and by providing another round of quantitative easing.
I mean, obviously yesterday there was kind of a tug of war between the computer algos expecting the Fed to come back in and add more QE, maybe take rates negative, or at least
Well, I don't think anybody expects that yet. But what could happen is a Fed official could come out and talk about the fact that, we're on pause right now. Based on some of the data that's come out, we're data dependent, and the data don't look so good right now. So we see no reason to move on interest rates, this year. That would be something that potentially traders are looking for, that kind of admission that would push the rate hikes into 2016 and out of 2015, which would be very friendly for the markets. And of course, once we get to 2016, that's an election year. There's a pretty good chance the Fed is going to punt throughout 2016, and people will then be able to not worry about rate hikes until 2017. And of course, by then we would have been in a recession anyway, and we'll have a whole new round of stimulus, and so the Fed will never have to raise rates.
I don't think they can, whether they want to or not.
A colleague of mine.
They can. Okay. That's the thing. They want to pretend they could raise rates because they want to pretend the economy can withstand higher interest rates, but they don't want to actually raise rates and prove that the economy can't withstand higher interest rates.
Yeah, and that's clearly the kick the can down the road game of chicken that's going on right now. A colleague of mine pointed it out yesterday, and I hadn't thought about this angle, but I think he's right. It's far cheaper for the Fed to prop up the stock market than it is to do another bailout of the big banks and pensions, at least as long as they have the ability to keep the market propped up, like yesterday, for example. What do you think it's going to take for the Fed to actually lose its ability to support the stock market?
Well, it means when the world stops supporting the dollar, because the Fed can support asset markets by printing money and buying up bonds and buying up treasuries and mortgages. And so that only works so long as somebody wants those dollars. But once the bottom drops out of the dollar, then the game is over, right? The Fed is now impotent because what good is it if it prints money that nobody wants? So that's ultimately where we're headed, to a dollar crisis. That's the only thing that's going to take away this punch bowl, because the Fed's not going to do it on its own.
And that kind of gets me to my next point, because I hadn't really taken it to this step that you've taken it in terms of the significance of the Chinese yuan devaluation, in which they're basically depegging it so that when the dollar finally rolls over and crashes, which is inevitable, it won't take the yuan down with it. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that was a brilliant insight.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that what's ultimately going to happen, and everybody is focusing on, China devalued, right? That's the Chinese yuan is going down. it's only down about 2 or 3% against the dollar, which means it's still way up against every other currency, right? Just like the dollar has gone up, the yuan has gone up. But the significance to me of China's move is what they said when they did it. They said they want their currency to be more reflective of what's happening in the market, not just rigidly pegged to the dollar. So that's going to work both ways. That means the next time the dollar starts to fall, it's also going to fall against the yuan. Because, what really helped keep the dollar from collapsing when they did QE 1 and 2 was the fact that the Chinese kept buying dollars to support our currency. Well, they might not do that next time. They might let their currency rise, which means there'll be no reason for a currency World War II, because one of the reasons that all the other emerging markets were buying dollars was so they can keep their currency from rising too much against the yuan. But if the yuan is going to rise with all the other currencies, then the dollar is going to sink. And so the next currency crisis could be much worse, because when the dollar falls, China won't be there to catch it.
And along those lines, Peter, with China creating well over 20 different direct currency swaps with some of the larger economies around the world, and the Dow losing approximately 1,800 points in the last 6 trading days, are we witnessing the end game right now? Is the fact that the U.S. dollar is no longer required for international trade? Is that the role? What role?
Well, we're moving in that direction. All of these countries that are taking action now to set up and negotiate these bilateral trade agreements that do not include the dollar, where countries are trading with one another in their own currencies rather than the dollar, this is just how the world is preparing for a post-US dollar global economy. I mean, just read the writing on the wall. We are moving in this direction. And of course, the US government is pushing the trend with its banking regulations, its FACTA, its anti-money laundering. I mean, America is really making it difficult for foreign countries, foreign banks, to deal in dollars anyway. And so they're making the dollar even less appealing intentionally, which, you're supposed to not bite the hand that feeds you. And that's exactly what we're doing by antagonizing the world and making it more difficult for them to loan us money and to use our currency. That's the last thing we should be doing. But that's what we're doing. And so we're pushing this move away from the dollar to happen even faster by our own incompetence.
And they are incompetent, that's for sure. And speaking of incompetence, Ben Bernanke called gold a barbarous relic. He said gold is not money. And with China recently making 2 different official gold holding announcements after 6 years of keeping everything under wraps, what does it matter? If gold is not money and it's a barbarous relic, why would it matter if China or Russia or India announce they have 100 tons or 1,000 tons? And who in the Western world would care, and why would they care?
Yeah, you're right. It wouldn't matter. Look at how much gold went up during Bernanke's time at the Fed, right? And if you count Greenspan, and Bernanke was, the second lieutenant for a while for Greenspan, I mean, gold prices went ballistic. So if you look at the price of gold is like a report card, Bernanke got an F based on how high the price went. Alan Greenspan used to say that, he could tell whether or not he was doing a good job by the price of gold. If the price of gold was lower than $400 an ounce, he was doing a good job, and if it was above, he was doing a bad job, right? Well, where is it when gold's 1,100, right? It means he's doing a terrible job. So yeah, he wants to discredit gold because gold is discrediting the Fed. Gold prices going up is a vote of no confidence in the fiat money that the Fed is creating. And but what's really a barbaric relic is the Federal Reserve note, the dollar, just a piece of paper backed by nothing. Gold is real money. It has a tradition of safety. Paper money has a tradition of failure. There is no paper money that has ever survived. They've all collapsed. They've all become worthless. And I don't think the current crop of paper money is going to be any different.
I think one thing that's kind of interesting, and that's awesome that you brought up that Greenspan quote about using gold as a measure of his performance. One thing that I had noticed during Greenspan's tenure, and I used to love watching Ron Paul just grill him, was that unlike Bernanke, who stated outright that gold is not money, I never saw Greenspan once get backed into a corner where he came out and said gold is not money. I think all along he's always been a gold guy.
Oh yeah, he has, and for a while he said that we didn't need it because the central bankers were as good. We can trust the wisdom of central bankers to provide the discipline formerly provided by gold. Well, if anybody believed that, which I didn't at the time, clearly that's been discredited by the facts. There is no discipline in central bankers. We got interest rates at zero. We got some central bankers have negative interest rates. We have quantitative easing. That proves there's no discipline whatsoever. I mean, it's like saying, an alcoholic has discipline when it comes to drinking. There's no discipline at all, right? They just drink themselves into a stupor. And that's what the central banks are doing right now. We'd be much better off if we were on a gold standard. And I think Alan Greenspan would agree with that now. If he didn't agree with it back then, he certainly agrees with it now.
Oh, I think he agreed with it all along. I think he was just put in charge to do a job. He got paid well to do it and enjoyed the power of the position. I mean, after all, for over a decade, he was the maestro.
Well, everybody thought he was the maestro.
Right.
They didn't realize the tune that he was playing. Now they think Janet Yellen is the maestro. They think she walks on water, right? She's probably the least competent of the bunch. She's a step down, literally. She's not just shorter than these other guys. I mean, the stature has been diminished ever since Paul Volcker. He was I think we've been getting shorter and shorter. But of course, as we go down in height, we go down in competence.
That's actually true.
But I don't think we can go shorter than Janet Yellen. I don't know if they could find anybody. Maybe they'd have to get Robert Reich. He was this labor secretary. Maybe they can make him Fed chairman. He might be shorter than Yellen. I'm not sure. Maybe not.
Well, Peter, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you one last question, and it's regarding your dad. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time. And your dad is currently in prison. He's a political prisoner for the simple fact of he wrote and published a book. And his book was outing.
It's a little deeper than that. I mean, he didn't just write a book. In fact, he wrote many best-selling books. But he also advocated and encouraged people to read the law, to understand the Internal Revenue Code and the Supreme Court's decisions that followed the passage of the 16th Amendment and the U.S. Constitution. He educated people to the point that they, like him, chose not to pay federal income taxes because they believed that they were not legally required to do so. And so the reason my father is in jail is because he was educating Americans as to a better understanding of the Internal Revenue laws and the Constitution. And so they put him in jail to shut him up, to discredit him, to stop him from, spreading his views and shining a light of truth on what the government's doing. He's 87 years old. He's been in jail for over 10 years. He basically got a 13-year sentence, which at this point is a death sentence, because just recently my father was diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer and, given, about 6 months to live. And, his sentence is, is longer than that. So, we're trying to get him out, on the compassionate release. But there's not much compassion in the penal system these days, especially for political prisoners. And what the difference is between a political prisoner and like a legitimate prisoner is legitimate prisoners are a threat to the public. Political prisoners are a threat to the government, and therefore they get no justice. You see, the government really, they will give justice to a typical criminal, right? If you're an axe murderer, you're going to get a fair trial. Because what's the worst thing that happens? They let you go, and you go out and you kill more people. The politicians don't care about that. But someone like my dad, who's exposing corruption in government, yeah, they want that guy in jail. Because him being out of jail is a threat to the government. He's not a threat to the people. My dad was trying to help the people protect themselves from the government. But the government wants to protect themselves from my dad. And that's the nature of political prisoners. There is no justice. They just put you in jail because you represent a threat to the status quo. Not a threat to the public, like a murderer would be, but a threat to the government's illegal power and their violating of law,
which they do every day. We are I personally believe we live in a world without the rule of law. They've proven that. Eric Holder proved it a few years ago when he exempted all of the officers of these criminal banks and said that they're too big to jail, and they prove it every single day. And they proved it over 10 years ago when they imprisoned your father illegally. That is a First Amendment violation. I mean, the man should be able to speak his mind. And education, what do we hear every day out of these politicians? We need better education. Your father's out there providing better education. And
yeah, well, when the government talks about better education, they just mean more expensive education. And I don't even consider it education. It's brainwashing.
Exactly.
They just want to waste money dropping it down the educational rat hole so they can enrich the unions and the bureaucracy involved in the so-called educational system. But really, we're just indoctrinating our kids, brainwashing them. They graduate with worthless degrees, drowning in debt. We really need to get the government out of education completely so that we can have market-based solutions to education that actually work, that actually educate people and don't bankrupt them.
There's a novel idea. Get the government out of the marketplace. Who would have thought? Well, we've been speaking with Mr. Peter Schiff, and his website is europac.com, and his company is Euro Pacific Capital. And Peter, we certainly appreciate all your time today, and I hope that we can do this again in the future.
Sure, anytime. And again, remember, europac.com if anybody wants to visit us. And, I do my own podcasting on schiffradio.com and my video blog at the Schiff Report on YouTube. I put out a lot of content, so make sure and, follow that. You can, follow me on, Twitter and my Facebook page. And I'm constantly out there, social media, internet, putting out this information as often as I can.
And you do a marvelous job, and we certainly appreciate all of your efforts. Dave, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I just want to thank you for your time. I mean, I think this has been a great conversation, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of it.
All right. Hey, great. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
we'll talk
you
with
too,
you soon.
Peter. We'll speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.